Hi class, this is course 3, lesson 54, angle relationships. Okay, so some vocabulary for you: adjacent angles and opposite angles. Adjacent angles share a side, they have a common vertex, and they do not overlap. Opposite angles are formed by two intersecting lines, they have a common vertex, and they do not share a side. Okay, so the difference between adjacent and opposite angles is that one shares a side, one does not share a side. And we can talk about how they're formed. Opposite angles are formed by two intersecting lines, and adjacent angles are not. Now, opposite angles are also called vertical angles, and you know that. We've talked about that before. And vertical angles are always going to be congruent. Okay, so if we had to make a list of adjacent angles with this figure here, we could say that angle 1 and angle 3 are adjacent. They share a vertex right here, or a common vertex, and they are next to each other. They share this side. Angle 1 is also adjacent to angle 2. Going this way, we can match angle 2 and angle 4. Those are adjacent, they're next to each other, and angle 4 and angle 3. Now I could have written angle 3 and angle 4, that's the same pair. So we have 4 pairs of adjacent angles. These two, these two, these two, and these two. So let's take a look at opposite angles. Opposite angles are across from each other. We have two intersecting lines. They share a vertex, and they do not share a side. So if I can't go next to, I have to go across from. So like these two, angle 1 and angle 4, or we have these here, angle 2 and angle 3. Okay, so make sure that you know the difference between adjacent and opposite angles. Also, make sure you know that opposite angles are also called vertical angles, and they are congruent. So here is a chart that you should have written down in your notes. Angle pairs that are formed by two intersecting lines. Adjacent angles are going to be supplementary, and opposite angles, or we call them vertical angles, they are congruent. Remember what supplementary means? That means the sum is 180 degrees. Okay, both of these facts that you have just been given, you're already aware of. So solving problems like this shouldn't be that difficult. So if you want to try to solve for angle 1, 2, 3, and 4, pause the video and then resume when you have an answer. What I know here is that I have a right triangle, and that I have this angle here that I know is 40 degrees. So I know that angle 2 is also 40 degrees because I have two lines, and these angles, angle 2 and angle 40, are opposite angles, so they're congruent. So I know that angle 2 is 40 degrees. Now, you might also see this notation here. That little m in front means the measure of the angle. So when you see the little m, that means the measure of angle 2 is 40 degrees. So then I'm going to write that in here so that we can keep track of that. So anytime you have problems like this, you might want to just sketch the problem onto your paper and then label things appropriately. Do not write in your textbook. What you know about angle 1 is that it is supplementary because it is adjacent to the 40 degree angle going this way or going this way. So the measure of angle 1 has to equal 180 degrees because they're supplementary minus the 40 degrees. That's going to give you 140 degrees. Okay, now angle 3 is inside that triangle, and you know that the sum of the angle measures in a triangle has to equal 180 degrees. So if I add the 90 plus 40, I'm going to get 130 degrees. Then I can subtract from 180 that 130 degrees, and I will get the 50-degree angle. Now, what about angle 4? Angle 4 is adjacent to, shares a vertex, and shares a side with angle 3. So it's supplementary. So that's going to be 180 degrees minus the 50-degree angle, and we get 130 degrees. So let's see, filling in these pictures on my diagram. There we go. Okay, so that's how you would solve that problem. Now, this again is review. Just make sure you have it down in your notes. Angles paired by combined measures. If we have two angles that total 180 degrees, that's supplementary, or two angles that total 90 degrees, that's complementary. Down here you have two lines that are parallel. So this is new vocabulary here. A line that passes through two parallel lines is called a transversal. Now I color-coded these. The transversal up here is red, and this line here is the transversal. These are the two parallel lines. Okay, so we have two parallel lines, and the third line that goes through both of those lines is called a transversal. We're going to use that transversal to get some more vocabulary. Corresponding angles are on the same side of the transversal and on the same side of parallel lines, and they are going to be congruent. Okay, so let's use, I'll use a red X, and we'll mark some of these. So on the same side of the transversal, so here's the transversal, so I'll go on the left side, and I'll just put an X here. So I'm on the left side of the transversal, but I'm above one of the parallel lines. So in my other parallel line, I need to be on the left side of the transversal and above the parallel line. So those two angles would be corresponding angles. They hold the same position in reference to the parallel lines in the transversal. Now, here we'll use a circle for another pair. We can go on the right side and mark those. Notice they are on the right side of the transversal, but they are above the parallel lines. Let's do a plus sign. We can mark below the transversal, or below the parallel lines and to the left of the transversal, and maybe just a minus below the parallel lines and to the right of the transversal. So each of these where I've made the same symbols, those are congruent. So the X is congruent with this. The angle that holds that place is congruent with that angle. Same here. The angle that I marked with the minus sign is congruent to this angle. And hopefully you can see that they are the same. Now let's go to the sets of alternate angles. We have alternate interior angles and we have alternate exterior angles. Alternate interior angles are on opposite sides of the transversal and are between the parallel lines. Okay, so alternate comes here, they're on opposite sides, interior is where you get between the parallel lines. These are congruent as well. So I'll use blue and we'll make a check mark, and they have to be between the parallel lines, so we're on the inside of the parallel lines. So if I make a check mark here, this angle has to be congruent to this angle here, because they are on opposite sides of the transversal and are inside the parallel lines. Here we can use a blue dot, and maybe this is going to be messy, and maybe you want to use some colored pencils, or maybe it makes more sense to number the angles and then just write the angle pairs down. Do what you are comfortable with. The other pair would be here and here. Okay, they are alternating. They are on opposite sides of the transversal but are still inside the parallel lines. So alternate interior angles, you will have 2 pairs. Corresponding angles, you have 4 pairs. Okay, now let's look at alternate exterior angles. These are going to be the same as alternate interior angles, with the exception of they're outside the parallel lines. Okay, so I switch to green, and I will use the number 1, and we'll mark 1 outside the parallel lines and alternating. So I'm on the left side of the transversal, so now I need to go to the right side of the transversal and mark it outside of the parallel lines. And we will use the number 2 for the other one, right here and right here. Outside the parallel lines on opposite sides of the transversal. And there will be 2 pairs of these as well. Okay, so here's a lot to write down. Congruent angle pairs formed by a transversal cutting 2 parallel lines. Okay, so the transversal, remember, just goes through 2 parallel lines. And this is the exact same thing that we just talked about back here. Corresponding angles, so you don't have to write this down if you already have it here. Okay. Corresponding angles are on the same side of the transversal, same side of the lines. Alternate interior, opposite sides of the transversal between the lines, and alternate exterior are opposite sides of the transversal outside of lines. So in this scenario where you have 2 parallel lines and a transversal, all of your obtuse angles are going to be congruent, all of your acute angles are congruent. And the sum of one acute angle and one obtuse angle is going to be 180 degrees. They're supplementary. So here's example 2 out of your book, and these are types of problems that you will be asked to solve. So you have a figure of parallel lines P and Q. So these are the 2 parallel lines, and they're cut by the transversal T. The measure of angle 8 is 55 degrees. What are the measures of the angles 1 through 7? So using what you know about corresponding angles, alternate interior and alternate exterior angles, you can go through and start marking things really quickly. You can also use what you know about vertical angles and angles being supplementary. 55 degrees would match up here because these are vertical angles. Well, 180 minus 55 will get you 125 degrees. That would go here because I have 2 adjacent angles, so their sum has to be 180. And these are vertical angles, so I can go here as well. Now, remembering what we know about corresponding angles, they hold the same position in reference to the parallel lines and the transversal. So angle 1 would be corresponding to angle 5, so this would be 55 degrees. This would be 125 degrees because angle 2 and angle 6 are corresponding. We can use our alternate interior angles and go angle 4 and angle 5 have to be congruent, and angle 3 and angle 6. So you can see how quickly you can know all of the angle measures if you know that you have two lines that are parallel and a transversal. Now, you are going to save room in your notebook to put this. We're going to give you a sheet of paper and you're going to cut this out and then fold things in and label them. Okay, so just make sure you save a page to tape this into when you get to class. And that is all I have for you today. It was a lot of information about parallel lines and a transversal and corresponding angles, alternate interior and alternate exterior angles. And you're going to find that once you get this, you've got it. And it's pretty cool the things that you can do with it. So I will see you in class and you'll get this handout and we'll work on it then.